Ugo sat quietly in the corner of the small room, his hands folded tightly in his lap. His face was bruised, his clothes torn, and his heart heavy with regret. He had been in countless fights before, but this one had felt different. It wasn't just his body that had been hurt. It was his spirit, his sense of who he was. It all began a few days earlier when Ugo had met Kelechi, a man he didn't know well but who had quickly become an enemy in his mind. They were both sitting in a local shop in the small Nigerian town, each trying to buy the last loaf of bread. Ugo, as usual, didn't like to give way to others, especially in small things like this. When Kelechi tried to reach for the loaf, Ugo was quick to claim it as his own. "You can't have this," Ugo had said, his voice firm and challenging. "I saw it first." Kelechi had frowned, but didn't want to make a scene. "Let's just share it," he suggested calmly. But Ugo was already too deep into his habit of arguing, too caught up in the pride that came from winning small battles. "No, I don't share with people like you. Go find your own." The situation escalated quickly. Words turned to insults, and before long, both men were shouting at each other in the middle of the shop. People gathered around, some trying to calm them down, but Ugo wasn't listening. He was too focused on proving his point, on making sure everyone knew he was right. "What's wrong with you?" Kelechi had finally shouted. "Can't you see how foolish you're being? A loaf of bread isn't worth all this trouble." But Ugo had only laughed, his temper rising even higher. "It's not about the bread. It's about respect. You can't just take what's mine." The argument didn't stop there. The two men exchanged harsh words, and soon the fight broke out. Fists flew, and the small crowd around them grew louder, urging them to stop. But Ugo, too proud and too angry, pushed on. The fight ended only when both of them were exhausted, bruised, and covered in dirt. In the days that followed, Ugo couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. His pride, his need to always win, had cost him more than he realized. The people in his town, once his friends and neighbors, now looked at him with disappointment. They had always known him as the person who couldn't let things go, who always had to be right. But this time, Ugo had gone too far. His wounds from the fight took days to heal, but the pain in his heart stayed with him much longer. He began to see the truth in Kelechi's words. What had he really gained from the fight? A momentary victory? But at what cost? His reputation was damaged, his pride had been bruised, and he had lost the respect of those around him. One evening, as Ugo sat alone in his room, he thought about his life and the many arguments he had started. He had always believed that being right was the most important thing, that he could never back down, no matter what. But now, he realized that sometimes the cost of winning wasn't worth it. The next time he saw Kelechi, Ugo walked up to him, his head lowered in shame. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I shouldn't have acted the way I did. I let my pride get in the way of common sense." Kelechi looked at him for a moment before nodding. "It's all right," he said, his voice calm. "We all make mistakes. What matters is learning from them." Ugo smiled softly, a small but meaningful gesture. He had learned a valuable lesson, that some battles weren't worth fighting, and that sometimes letting go of pride was the only way to truly win.